I'm architect Drew Paul Bell, and in this video, this is a recording that I got to do with Michael Riscica. I got to have this conversation with him and his group with the ARE Bootcamp. And now, if you don't already know Michael Riscica, you should Google him and check him out. He has a podcast called the Young Architect Podcast, and he also runs the ARE Bootcamp, where he trains students, or not students, but like potential architects to pass the AREs, which are some of the hardest licensing exams around. So he does this stuff, and this is like premium content. You have to pay money to be able to get this kind of coaching. He had me in to talk to his clients, his bootcamp members. And so this is kind of like premium content that he let me post up on my YouTube channel. So I'm excited to get to share this with you and hope that you enjoy it and get a lot of value out of it. And I talked in this video about like my approach to taking the exams and kind of my journey through getting the exams done. And I think that it's going to be very valuable for you to check out. So we're going to get into that in a second. But then before we get into it, I still want to give one more plug for something else Michael Riscica is doing, which is awesome. It's the Young Architect Conference. And the Young Architect Conference is coming up. It's in Portland, Oregon. And I want you to check out the links below to see all the details about who's speaking, dates, locations, all that stuff. That's going to be in the link below. And I'm actually going to be a speaker at that conference. I'll be a keynote address speaker, so if you want to maybe meet up with me, I'm going to be over there, so hit me up on Twitter or Instagram or whatever, and or here on YouTube, and let me know if you're going to be there. Check it out, see if you're interested in going, and I think this is going to be a great conference. We're going to be talking about how we, as the up-and-coming young generation of young architects, are actually going to change the profession, rather than just talking about the idea of changing the profession. So if you want to be a part of that, check out the links below, sign up for this conference, and I hope to see you there. It's in Portland. And with that, I want to get into this content and from Michael Riscica's ARE Bootcamp. I hope you enjoy. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, and let me know what you think in the comments down below.
I got my buddy Drew Paul Bell here. Drew and I have been friends for a long time. I feel like I found you on the internet a long time ago, and I started watching your videos on YouTube. And then I think it was in Orlando. I met you at one of the AIA parties, and we've kept in really close touch ever since. What happened? You were studying for your exams when I met you. And then I remember, I don't know what had happened, but I remember I think you took a break for a little while, and it was on my last speaking tour. I came through Atlanta. And I gave a pretty big lecture to a lot of people in Atlanta. I remember Marion Bledsoe was at that one. Drew actually went to architecture school with Marion. She's a part of this group as well. There she is. Or no, actually I have two Marions. That might be the other one. But so I came to Atlanta. I gave a great lecture to everyone. And I remember I left, and then a couple months later, you told me, you're like, Mike, I finished my exams. You know, you came down and you gave me the kick in the ass I needed, and I just got back to work and I finished my exams, and you banged out PPD, PDD, and I'm super proud of you, man.
Thanks a lot, man. Appreciate it.
And then I got more to say about Drew too. I remember when I met you originally in Orlando, you had said to me, you said, you know, I've been living in Atlanta, Georgia, almost my whole life or whatever, and I want to move to New York City. And then you finished your exams, and then I want to say a couple months after you were done with your exams, you got a new job in New York City as a licensed architect, and now you're living in New York. And so congratulations on accomplishing that one too.
Yeah, thanks a lot, man. Those are like the two top items on my bucket list that I got to check off last year. It was pretty great.
Awesome. So Drew, I kind of wanted to just start off with just some basic insights for other people that are studying for the exams, like any advice, any big lessons you learned, anything that NCARB never tells you that you think everyone else should know.
Yeah, well, I think that for me, one of the major first things I had to figure out was what should you study? And it's something that everybody asks. And for me, whenever I would ask people, everybody I talked to had an opinion about whether or not Ballasts or Kaplan or Brightwood or whatever was the number one study material. For me, it seemed like I was trying to sort of get by with the minimum. I think I started out with construction documents and services in the old version of the exam. I did the transition process, and in kind of cutting the corners, it just didn't work. My first time I failed. And then I kept talking to people about like, hey, what should I be studying? What should I be studying? And eventually everything kind of clicked when I realized like everybody who has an opinion about which one is better has studied more than one source. So for me, like the number one advice that I give to people who are like, who ask me what to do, who are struggling with passing the exams is like, if you're wondering what you should study, you should be studying more than one thing no matter what. And so for me, for all the exams that I passed, I was always studying 2 different resources, whether that be Brightwood or Ballasts or like the Black Spectacles videos or just tons of other books, especially for PPD and PDD. Those just required like so many different resources.
Yeah.
I thought it was really important to get multiple perspectives on the same type of information, because if you're only getting like one kind of stovepipe view of the content, you don't necessarily know like if they're talking about here's like the 6 different types of urban design layouts. Like how do you know this is the 6 or this is like Ballast's 6? You know, to me it always helped me to find out information from different sources.
Yeah.
So for me that was a primary one. And then also going back to something that you articulated really well in your talk, which was like, don't do the minimum, like do the maximum. Because on my first go at it, like it was my first time, I was kind of stepping in, and part of the way I do things is probably when I'm trying something new for the first time, I'm not afraid to kind of screw it up, because then I learned something about it. So I was trying to kind of screw it up by finding out how little I could get away with, which was kind of, I don't know, it was what it was. Didn't work out. So I like the way you put it. It was like, make sure that like you're going all the way and doing as much as you can. Basically what I learned after the first couple of exams, it was like, if you think you have to know it, yeah, you have to know it.
Yeah.
And like, go figure it out, rather than trying to cut corners and figuring out like, what can you skip? What do you not need to know? Instead, just like assume that you have to know everything.
Yeah. And one of the analogies I always use too is like, remember in architecture school, imagine if you said to the professor, like, hey, professor, listen, I don't want to do any extra sketches or any extra research. I just want to like start by building my final model and, you know, start with my final drawings, and let's just draw it once and get it done with. It's not what it's about. That's not going to give you an A project. And if you approach studying that way too, just like trying to just worrying about what's the minimum I need to do to pass this test, like you're not going to learn anything. You're not going to become an amazing architect.
Yeah. And part of my approach, I think also with taking the test, I would say the mindset that I had to get into in order to study successfully, it also was like considering the fact that all the stuff that I was studying, that I was learning, was stuff that like I ought to have known. You know, like it was complementing kind of what I was doing in the office, because it was stuff that I needed to know for the office. Like probably, even if it hadn't come up yet, like I knew it was going to come up. And I did a video on my YouTube channel talking about this kind of mindset. And one of the ideas is that, you know, I flipped the way that I would talk about it to myself. Instead of being like, oh, I have to go study tonight, instead I would say I get to go study tonight.
Yeah.
I get to go learn this stuff. Like I chose to major in architecture. I chose to be interested in how brick construction works, or the different types of like whatever. Like I picked that as more interesting than accounting or whatever else. Like I get to study how buildings go together, and I genuinely feel that way. It's just that when you're slogging through and you're telling yourself, oh, I have to go study, I have to take these exams, it becomes like this chore, and it's still kind of a chore, still hard to study. But when you're saying that you get to go do it, I get to go study, I get to go take these exams, I get to go become an architect, rather than I have to. Like for me, that helped guide me through, like especially the last push of my last 2 exams I had to take. And that mindset helped me out a lot.
Yeah. I had a kind of a mindset shift too when I was getting close to my end. Was I had this weird, almost entitlement moment where I realized that after my education, all the projects, my IDP and my exam experience, I should have been licensed by now, but I'm not. And I stopped acting, and I know it's a dirty word, but I stopped acting and thinking like an intern. And I started mentally acting like a licensed architect, even though I wasn't quite there yet. And when I kind of made that mental shift of let's let go of this intern shit and let's step into and really own being an architect, it made a difference with kind of pushing me over the finish line.
And I've had to go through that same mental shift in the office too, even, you know, like kind of getting to the point where, let's say like they're redlining stuff, and I know that like they're redlining something for me. Let's say they're telling me something through red lines that they've told me before on other projects. Yeah. And I kind of get to the point where it's like, wait a minute, like I should take ownership of this. I should know what's going on. If I'm not sure, I should go check the other projects. there was that moment of taking ownership of it, right? And that same thing kind of had to happen as well for me taking the exams, because it's like, you don't just want to know the content to check off the boxes and pick the right answers. Like, you want to actually understand it and actually know it, because like one day you're going to have to use it out in the field. And like I don't know, man, that stuff is real. And this reminds me too about one of the other common complaints about the exam. You know, they always like, oh, they have all these trick questions and all that. And like, yeah, that kind of sucks. But like we've had contractors call up and be like, what size nails are we using on the back deck? And the answer is, we're not using nails, we're using screws.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they'll kind of ask you something because they're coming at it with a set of assumptions, and they're going to ask you kind of a leading question because they think they know kind of where the answer is. But if you fall into that frame, you would say something wrong. Like, you do actually have to like step back and have the self-awareness to identify the trick question. Like when a contractor calls, and it's not that they're trying to trick you. Like, they're like, I don't think that they're trying to trick you, right? But on the test, there are those types of questions where they have like the tricky questions, and a lot of people complain about that, and they're like, oh, it's not fair. But like, I wouldn't complain about that. I would say, look, that's the way that it is. I have to be prepared for that, and I'm going to handle it when it comes up, because it is also going to come up in the real world. Like, the real world isn't cut and dry where every question is not necessarily has a clear answer to it.
Yeah. Do you think all this studying you've done and all this whole architect exam experience has helped you in the office and your professional life?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, it's hard because like the exam is kind of like this bundle of information, and then the way that gets applied in a particular office is probably unique within the office. They're sort of like, to some degree, you have to be good at architecture, and you also have to be good at fitting into the system of the office that you're at. And so sometimes you can always kind of check the book and you can check other projects when you're in the office, but I don't know. I think having the general knowledge it makes me feel more confident. Whether I'm pulling from that every day or not doesn't really matter. It's like in the moments where I have to make a decision, I have a better sense of what has to come up, and I know what I have to go look up, even, you know, because they say that there's like the things that you know, there's the things you don't know, but then there's the things you don't know. Mm-hmm. And so like, if you don't know, like if you're like super new and you don't know that like concrete needs expansion joints, you don't think to put them on, you don't even know to ask, hey, do we need expansion joints? Because you're not thinking about it. But like, when you know that they're there, you know that they have to be there, then the question isn't, do we need them? It's, how do we draw them? How do we get them on the set? How do we space them out? And you can go then ask better questions about it. Same thing with like, if you're doing details, you can think more clearly about how you're actually going to keep water out, how you're going to take care of expansion, whatever materials you're working with. It gives you a little bit more autonomy, so that then, even if you don't know the answer about how to do the detail, you know how to go ask the question to your boss or whatever.
Yeah. Drew, I wanted to ask you, and guys, feel free to interrupt both me or Drew if you think anything you want to chat about. Did you fail an exam? Any exams? Yeah. Can you talk about that? Kind of what that experience was like for you?
Yeah. So I failed my first two exams. I did the transition process. So I started where we had the vignettes. And on my very first test, I took construction documents and services. I failed the multiple choice question portion, and then I passed the vignette. And so then on my second test, I took site planning and development, or no, was it PPP?
Yeah.
Yeah, I took PPP, programming planning. No.
Programming planning practice. Yeah.
Yeah. And then on that one, I passed. I studied like hell for the multiple choice. I passed the multiple choice, but then I failed the vignette. And so I got cocky about the vignette. I failed it the second time around. And so then on the third attempt, I did construction documents and services again, I think. And then finally I was able to like put them both together and pass the vignette and the questions. So then after that, I passed all three of the 4.0 exams, and like in a row, because I had already taken two of them once already. And then site planning and development had a lot of overlap. Then I transitioned to the 5.0, and then I failed my first attempt at a 5.0 exam. I think I did PDD first. Yeah. And it was just a beast of a test. And I remember taking the test thinking like, there's so much information in this. Like I didn't even know how I was supposed to know all of it. And so I took that one, and then I kind of like I waited a few months. I was kind of kicking the can down the road about studying more, because it took a major sacrifice to study, and I knew that that test in particular was just going to be so much information. Like, even as I was going over the Ballast review manual and watching videos, I still wasn't sure that I knew everything. Like, I still was super hesitant to sign up for the exam. But then, like, after a few months of studying, like 2 or 3 months of studying more, I signed up for the test. I took it, I passed it. And I know that for PDD, for example, on my first attempt, I felt like the first 10 questions like hit me in the mouth. Like, I had no idea what I was doing. I got to the first 10. I was like, dude, I'm just screwed. Like, there's no way I got this.
Yep.
And I kept waiting for like an easy one to come up. I kept like skipping questions, trying to get to an easy one. And they weren't there. But then on my second attempt, I remember breezing through the first 10, thinking like, man, I got this. Like, these are pretty easy. I think like you don't get A's, but I think I aced the retake of PDD. And then I turned around and took PPD about a month later. And like, I wouldn't say I aced it, but I know I passed it, because I hadn't studied quite as long for it. It was a slightly different kind of perspective on the same type of information. But yeah, that was my experience in like taking some exams and failing them. I felt like, especially after my first two, after failing something, it sucks because like you don't get a ton of feedback, so you don't really know like what you're doing well and what you're not doing well. And for me, especially after I took my first one, I felt pretty helpless. Like, I had no idea what to do. That's why like I always tell people to, you know, study multiple sources, because that was the first realization for me that helped. Because otherwise it was like I was trying to like read up from NCAR what was on the test, and then I basically thought, oh well, they're just rehashing the contracts, so why don't I just study the contracts? And that was just wrong. Like, there just wasn't enough. Like, it had to be the books, it had to be multiple things. So that moment of helplessness was really hard. And like, I'm not really sure how I ever came to what to do next, but it was kind of just a matter of like saying, okay, well, I know that we have these study materials and I would love to have to not buy them, but I'm just going to do that and chug along, study those things, because I don't know what else to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I get there. How has your life changed since you've been licensed? I mean, like, we're talking about the whole New York thing, but
yeah, so like my dream was always to live in New York, and that was, I think I got my license pretty quick compared to the people that I graduated with. And one of the main reasons for that was because like I wanted to live in New York City really bad. And I knew that in order to afford to live in New York, you basically have to have a license. And that was like a primary driving force for me. I know a lot of people who are kind of approaching the exams because like it's what they want to do, and that's pretty motivating. But for me, like, I would do anything to live in New York. And so I was ready and willing to kind of sacrifice it all and like forego the social life for basically a year and a half and just make it happen. So that was a major driving force. Yeah, once I got the exam, once I passed the exams, I was hanging around the office. I kept working. I didn't tell anybody at the office I was planning on moving away. My boss finally came to me to talk about a raise. I didn't go press him on it. He let it sit though. He still let it go like a few weeks or a month or so before he came and talked to me. And we had kind of the raise talk, and we were a small firm, so we still didn't get to where I really wanted to be, but I also knew that I was trying to head out anyway. So then I started applying to a bunch of firms up in New York, and I interviewed with like 2 or 3 and finally got a job offer. I think it was in October that I got the offer. And then it was kind of through October into November, I was working on moving up here.
I think what's important to acknowledge, though, is it seemed like you had a very clear vision about what was going to happen after your exams were over and how you were going to move into the next chapter of your life.
Yeah.
Pull you through over the finish line.
Yeah, for sure. I think that they say there's some expression where they say like a good why can handle any how. Like, if you know why you're doing something and you have that vision of what you're going to get from it, and you know why you want it, and it means a lot to you, then you can handle any obstacle that gets in your way. Like, that was how I was able to study as much as I studied to pass the exams, because that meant so much to me. Yeah, and then having a sense of like where I was going next, that was big too. It's funny, I was kind of thinking also about how like the different types of accomplishments kind of play out, because like when you're taking the exam, you're like, I'm studying for this test. And by the time you're taking like the final exams, like you've already sat for at least 5 exams already, like even more if you failed some like I had. And like you know what it's going to be. Like, you know, once you get your license, you're going to show up at work tomorrow and everybody's going to be happy and it's going to be cool. And then you're going to go on about life and it's going to be cool. You're going to have a party on the weekend. But like that's a different type of accomplishment than like the moving to New York. Like if you're trying to move to some new job, you're trying to get some new thing, that's like jumping out into the abyss. You don't really know where you're going. And so the motivation for that is kind of tricky, because then it's like, okay, I'm going for something and I have this vision of what I think it is in my head, but if it's not that, I don't even know. And so kind of I felt like looking back, I almost missed the security that I had of like knowing that for the accomplishment of passing the exam, I was going to be done with the exam. And I knew what was going to be up next. And like, it was cool knowing what I was moving towards. Whereas the moving to New York thing, it was like, I don't know how this is going to turn out. And it was kind of riskier, harder to fully go like pedal to the metal on it.
Yeah. Glad that you finally pulled it off, man, and you're there. You're
Yeah,
out.
thanks, man.
I feel like I saw Drew right as soon as he moved to New York, and I was like, I'm getting the hell out of here. It's cool.
I know, man. People kept asking me if I know people up in New York. I was like, yeah, man, I got this friend. He runs like a podcast. And then I was up here, and then you were there for like a week, and then you're like, all right, peace. Yeah. Going to Florida. Yeah. I was like, well, there goes my person.
But yeah. You guys got any questions for Drew while we got him here?
I don't have a question. This is Kristen, but I just want to say it's good to hear how you kept coming back after failing. I failed my first test. Take another test in a couple months, and it makes me feel like, okay, even if I do fail and I study my hardest and just get shit luck, like I know I can just keep coming back, because you know, just hearing your story makes it feel a lot more positive and motivating for me, no matter if you fail at the beginning, the end, or the middle. So I appreciate that.
Thanks. Have you signed up yet?
No, I'm thinking like 6 to 7 weeks. I got married, so I'm in the process of changing my name on NCARB so I can actually sign up for the test. So I'm hoping in like a week or two.
Okay. Don't procrastinate on signing up. You do. That was so funny. So New Year's came around last year, and I was like, okay, so I got this. This is my big like bucket list item: moving to New York City and getting my architecture license. And I spent January last year working on my resume and portfolio. Like my New Year's resolution was I was going to spend 20 minutes every day working on either moving to New York or studying to pass my exams and become a licensed architect. And like I held to that through passing my exams in June. I spent 20 minutes every day at least, except for like one day I got sick, like one day I missed. But there's another lesson in there, right? It's packed into it's that if you're going to commit to doing something, commit to the process, right? Because so many people are like, oh, my New Year's resolution is I'm going to lose weight. But like, or let's say if your New Year's resolution was I was going to pass the exams, that's a goal, that's an end thing. Instead, what you have control over is what you're going to do every day. Focus on doing the same thing every day for 20 minutes at least. And so for me, I was like, I'm committing 20 minutes to passing the test. And I obviously studied more than 20 minutes most days, but there were some days where I just did not want to do it. And I would sit, like by damn, I was going to sit at the desk and read a book for 20 minutes minimum. And usually that turned into an hour or 2 hours or 3 hours. But like I was committed to spending 20 minutes a day on it. And so I forgot what my main point was. Started out with, okay, January. Yeah, I was doing I committed to doing this. And then by February, I think I still hadn't signed up yet. And I needed a kick in the ass at that point to like sign up for the test, because like if I didn't sign up, I would just keep kicking the can down the road and I wouldn't actually get in. But as soon as I signed up, then it was like go time. It's committed. I know that this is happening in a month, and I'm going to do what I have to do between now and then to study. But it's a hard step to take, to commit to that. But don't procrastinate on it.
Any other questions from you guys for Drew?
Yeah, I have a question. So how do you prepare for a retake of the test, especially if you have some questions that you were not sure if you answered it the right way or no, or if you go take a test with previous questions that you didn't find the answers for?
Wait, I need to interject right here, and let me just say my thing is, if there's stuff you weren't quite sure how you saw in the test and how to get the answers for it, what you don't do is you don't walk around and say, hey, I saw this question on my test, and say, how does this thing work? Just say, how does this thing work? We don't need to know that we saw it on your test.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That was my public service announcement, but I'll let you answer the question.
Well, first of all, for me, whenever I get out of a test, like I would always sit in the car and just brain dump as many like questions as I could onto the piece of paper. That way I knew that like I could go study those things again just for me, and I could go look up the stuff, because like I just spent 2 hours engrossed in this thing. Like I remember a lot of the questions. And so I would write down as much as I could remember and then make sure that I went and studied that. And I still admit, like I remember some questions specifically that I don't need to bring up, but like I see what they were asking, and I think I understand everything at play, but like I still think that the answer is subjective about what you should do in this scenario. And for me, I don't stress out about those too much, because I assume that, listen, if something is too confusing, like I'm just not gonna, I get it right. I have to do what I think is the right answer, but I also accept the fact that I'm not going to get a 100%. I don't need to get every single question correct. I need to get enough of them correct that I pass. So I don't stress out about those. I look at the other content that, let's say I knew that generally I needed to know about this one area that I didn't know a lot about. For example, the firm that I was working at back in Atlanta, we were a single family residential firm. We did a lot of wood frame construction. I don't think I'd ever drawn a detail of a brick wall before, and like maybe one or two, but like not to the extent of like we had never drawn a parapet, and we had to know parapet details basically for like water, how to keep water out of a building, and like that wasn't the type of thing that I had really spent a lot of time on. So I knew that I had to go study steel frame construction and brick construction. So I focused in on that, and so I focused in on those areas. I would say I tried not to psych myself out about the retakes. I guess that there were times in the days and weeks leading up to the test where I would psych myself out a little bit, but I always tried to bring myself back to center to say that, listen, I remind myself that I took the test, I took the notes, I then studied it, and I put in the work that I think I needed to put in. I took care of what I could control, and now I'm going to go in and I'm going to do the best that I can. And so that was my approach to it. That was how I handled failing the exams.
Drew, what's in the pipeline for Drew Paul Bell YouTube channel?
I have to get some videos out pretty soon.
Yeah.
Yeah, dude, my YouTube channel had to kind of go on the back burner while I was taking the tests, and then again while I was applying to jobs in New York. And yeah, I started the channel back in college when I started watching TED Talks and kind of fell in love with like all the awesome content online. Started following a couple individuals in particular who were talking about business and that kind of thing. And I could always see how like the business stuff kind of could apply to studio. Like how do you design a marketing plan and understand your target market? It was very similar to like how do you understand the occupants of a building and design for them. And so I could always see the tangential relationship, but then I was like, yeah, but where's the guy talking about architecture? So I don't have to translate everything. And I couldn't find him. So then eventually I decided that I could try to be that type of voice on YouTube and like try to give advice to students, like the mentorship type of advice that I wish I had gotten as a freshman and sophomore. So yeah, that was going pretty good. And I was doing that for a few years, and I still consider myself doing it, but I haven't uploaded a video in a while. I had to totally just kind of prioritize and execute on what I was going to get done.
Yeah.
And so it had to be on the back burner. But I'm up here in New York now. I have to do some video about being in New York, and I want to cover a bit of info like what we're talking about here about like how to pass the exams and kind of how I went through that in particular, because my idea for the channel was always that it was going to evolve. Like as I was fresh out of school, I could talk about how to succeed in school, and now once getting a license, now I can talk about like how do you transition into the workforce. So hopefully my content's going to be evolving pretty soon, but just got to start recording some stuff.
Drew, what I love about all of your content and one kind of the thread that I see that goes through all of it is just having a good fucking attitude about becoming an architect and going to architecture school and just going through this whole process and loving it and enjoying it. And I think it's contagious.
Yeah, thanks, man. And you know, and I before I left, I came to one of your meetings up here in New York where you guys were talking about questions. And like this brings up something that I wanted to bring up, and it's that I noticed kind of an attitude in the room. There were a few people who were kind of cynical about the questions. They're like, oh, that's like some trick question, or it's going to be some impossible thing. They were kind of assuming that something was going to go wrong in the way that they were being given the exam. They thought something about it was unfair. But going back to kind of my anecdote about the contractor could call you up asking what kind of nails you're supposed to use and supposed to be screws. Like, I'm not saying I never complained about questions being unfair, but I tried to get over that real quick because I realized that there were a lot of them. And one of my rules for life that I got way back in like middle school, it was like I had to come to a realization at some point that like you can sit around, like if you lose and you say, oh, it's not fair that I lost, maybe it is fair that you lost. And like if you had won, then there would be some kid on the other side of town who lost that game, and then they would be saying, no, it wasn't fair that they lost. And I kind of I decided that one of my rules for myself was going to be that nothing in life is fair, and you have two options. You can sit around and complain about it, or you can make sure that you're the one that comes out on top when the dust settles. And that doesn't mean cheat, because if you have to cheat to win, then it's only a matter of time before somebody comes around and beats you and you're cheating. Mm-hmm. But like, you could easily sit back and complain that like, oh, these questions are unfair, they're giving us a hard time. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. Like, you can complain about that all you want, but that's not going to get you to succeed. And the question is like, do you want to pass the tests, or do you want to claim that it's not your fault and deny responsibility for having not passed? And I decided that I didn't want to sit around and say, oh, it's not fair. Like, and I didn't want to say, oh, these questions are too hard, there's no right answer to this question that I remember. Instead, I was going to take ownership of the situation and say, look, I'm going to know so much that even with those trick questions, it's not going to beat me, that I'm still going to win on top of that. And like, to me, that mindset is super important. And it's one that like, I think especially on the internet, people like to throw little pity parties for themselves. Mm-hmm. Or I mean, at any time, at any point in life, and I do it too sometimes, but I try to limit that and try to stop that, you know, and especially about the exams, because look, yeah, it's hard, but like, get over it. You know, being an architect is hard, and you have to know a lot, and you have to be able to recall information when you weren't necessarily having it on the top of your mind. Going into the exams, I feel like it's this kind of sectioned off little world, and you just get as prepared as you can, no matter what's going to get thrown at you, and just go in there anyway. Mm-hmm. And to me, like that mindset though was something that I wanted to make sure I brought up, because I think that whether you approach it as a victim or you approach it as somebody who's going to win can really make a difference about the experience for you.
One of the things I deal with a lot especially with the ARE Bootcamp, is I got a lot of recent graduates, and I also get a lot of people who speak English as a second language, mm-hmm. who think that not having any experience or the language thing is a barrier, or it's going to make or break, it's going to break them with passing these exams. Any thoughts or insights about that? I mean, you're a young guy, Drew. Yeah,
I mean, look, it might be. Like, maybe that is going to be an extra challenge for you, but it doesn't matter. Like, if you want to pass, you still got to get over it.
Yeah.
I don't know about the language barrier thing, because English has always been my first language. But I think that in terms of the lack of experience, yeah, like I had a lot to learn. But to me, that was all the more reason why I had to go study it. Mm-hmm. Like, I was studying this stuff thinking like, gosh, I can't believe I didn't know this already. Like, I'm in the office, and I would have to go ask the person across the room about how to go do this. Maybe I was letting it could have even been a pride thing, but I think I was letting my pride make me study more. And so like, I'm cool with that. I didn't know a lot, but I took studying as an opportunity to go learn more. Like, I don't think that not knowing a lot is not a good reason to quit.
Yeah.
It's a good reason to study more.
And I think what you said too, it might be an extra challenge. You might not have any experience in the language barrier. It might be an additional challenge, but considering with how far we've come in our lives to get us to this point, take the architect exam, with graduating high school, graduating architecture school, finding the time and energy and the money to do this process, there's that extra challenge it's not a big deal. And you might just have to work a little bit extra hard, but it seems to me like the ability to focus and concentrate and really make the most of your time studying for these things, and to really just not get distracted with a million other things, I think is 10 times more valuable than maybe having 10 years or 20 years experience in the field.
Yeah, and I love the way that you explained that too, because that helped kick me in the ass when you came through Atlanta and gave that lecture. And that was one of the realizations that I was glad to have. It was that, yeah, it's hard, but like you have come a long way to get here. Architecture school was not a cakewalk. It was hard. And then transitioning into the workforce, like that was hard too. Like it wasn't so easy to go start at a job after 5 years of doing college. It still took learning a lot. And yeah, it's so easy to kind of get just tunnel vision at to like where you're at right now and kind of forget all the work that you've put in the past. And yeah, I think that's a good perspective to have about like how much you've already worked.
Drew, you got any questions for the boot camp?
What do you guys think you're struggling with?
Me personally, I'm struggling with the rest of life coming in the way so that I do get to study. I enjoyed a lot the first boot camp that I did started in September, and being able to focus, that was a great feeling. I neglected stuff from the rest of life that I have to pick up again so that I can focus once more. That's what I struggle with.
That was hard for me too a lot. I felt like I'm not good at balancing things. I can do things like all the way, and that's going to be the one thing that I'm doing. And so I basically had to cut out just social life in general. I remember for my first exam, when I signed up for the first test, all these things started coming at me in my life, like, oh, here's awesome opportunities. And I indulged in all of them. And then I didn't pass the test. Like, I remember I had like 2 weekends in a row, I had free tickets to college football games. Like my parents had some that they weren't going to use. And then my friend won something at his office, and then we got to go to some other one. And I kept saying yes to these types of things. And then I just didn't pass. And on like the next few, it was like, look, I'm just going to say no to everything. And I had like a Tuesday meetup with some guys. Like we would always meet up on Tuesdays, and I maintained that. And I had some friends like on like a Sunday night kind of a thing. So I'd meet up with people then, but it was like no more going out to the bars, no more going out for drinks, no more like parties or whatever. It's like this is the thing that I'm doing. I had to cut out everything else. I couldn't be dating. If I was dating, I was not passing exams. If I was single, I was passing exams. And some people, like, they can balance that, but I wasn't one of those people. And I had to commit to put everything else on the side. And on some level that's hard, but on another level is also super like simple. I think in the book, The Fountainhead by Ayn Rand, her main character, Howard Roark, was an architect. And she said something about him, like in her characterization notes, she was like, he knows that his one goal in life is to win the right. He knows that he has the ability to win the right to be himself. And so his life, therefore, outwardly appears very difficult, but inwardly is very simple. Inwardly is very easy. And for me, that's the kind of groove I felt like I had to get into. The point where outwardly it was going to look really hard because I'm studying all the time. I'm not going out having a lot of fun. But inwardly, it's easy because the decision's already been made. I'm putting in my time studying, and that's that. And it helps if you can have like a family around you to help support you and all that, have friends that are cool with it. And like my mom and dad lived an hour or two south of me, and like a couple of times, especially leading up to exams, they're always like, can we come up and bring you anything? And that was awesome. But like, even just like the emotional support, knowing that like my friends and my family are cool with it. I was like, I got to say no to all this stuff, and it's just what I have to do. And so, yeah, it was an important part for me, kind of pulling everything off.
How many weeks did you typically study for each test, and like, or like typical hours you'd study a week?
My main North Star was like the 20 minutes a day. Near the end, it was like the 20 minutes a day, every day. But it was always where I aimed for at minimum. And usually it ended up being like an hour or 2 hours or 3 hours. In terms of how long I would study for, I don't have like an exact number. And it's also fuzzy because like I did some retakes. So let's say three of the exams I took the second time. And so I studied like a month or two before. I would say I generally try to have like a month or two of studying. I would say ideally in my head, the way I thought it should be was it should be that I study for a month, I sign up for the test a month away, and then I study one more month as I approach the test. And I don't know if I always followed through on that. And sometimes that was on the retake. Maybe I was studying again for a month and then scheduled it for a month later. But I didn't micromanage every minute of every day. What I would do is I would try the 20 minutes thing, or I would do videos like in the morning while I'm eating breakfast, because it's easy to get going. Like I would get starting with my day on the studying, and then also coming back to it later on at night. But if I just went to work, spent all my mental energy at the office, got home, I didn't really feel like studying. So if first thing I do is I start studying by just watching the videos while I'm eating breakfast, like that's easy. You got to get the ball rolling and get the right momentum. Then in the evenings, I would come home and it would be easier for me to study. Also, another trick that I did was I got into meditation back when I was in college. And so I would meditate actually when I got home from work. So I would eat dinner and then meditate for 20 minutes and then go study. And to me, that kind of helped refresh my mind. It helped me it almost felt like I had a second day every day. And otherwise at the end of the day, it's so hard to get anything done. But with that little break, the little meditation, sometimes that would even turn into a nap. It doesn't matter. Like even after that, it's easy to start studying some more. So I focus on it like a day by day kind of basis rather than necessarily a planned out number of hours. But I've heard Michael's rule about, you said 100 hours per exam, right?
A minimum, because sometimes I talk to people and they go to some 5-hour seminar and they think that's all they need to pass, go pass the test. But yeah.
I think that's a good rule of thumb.
Yeah.
That sounds like that makes a lot of sense to me.
At a minimum. And to be honest with you, there's a lot of people on this call who've gone way above 100 hours before they take a test.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, the more the better.
I had a question, I guess you sort of already answered, about handling stress. You spoke about meditating, but if you could elaborate on that a little bit, like how do you remember handling stress, sleeping well, not sleeping well, were you a nervous wreck or weren't you, or stuff like that?
Yeah, so I started meditating back when I was in college, and meditating helped me out a lot. It's helped out a lot in life in general, being able to manage stress. Working out is also something that I would do consistently, especially when I was studying. And so all those things helped. And then also it ties into what I was talking about earlier about you kind of have to decide when you're looking at something, are you going to be the victim? Like I've heard psychologists break this down, even with like exams and work and that kind of thing. Like, are you going to go in as predator or prey? And you think that this exam is something that's going to come get you, then you're on your heels. You're not approaching it right. If instead you look at it like you're the one going on the attack, it's not, are you ready for the test? Is that test ready for you? Because you're going in there and you studied all that you can, it's not going to stop. And knowing it's not going to stop you is also an important thing to realize. Because like I have a friend, one of my best friends back in Atlanta is a high school teacher. And after I failed PDD, I told him that he knew I was studying all the time. I told him I'd failed. He's like, oh shit, man, that sucks. He was like, are you going to get to retake it? And I said, yeah, I got to wait like 60 days or something. And then he was like, oh, well, I mean, you can't really fail a test you can retake. And I was like, yeah, you're right. Like from his perspective, he's a high school teacher. When he gives test number 3 of the semester, kids don't get to retake test number 3. They didn't do so well on it. Like they failed it, and that's what's going in the grade book. But with this test, if you don't pass it, yeah, you're out the money, but I mean, you're going to make back the money right away once you get that raise. And like, it can't, like the question isn't, are you going to pass? It's when are you going to pass? Because you get to take it again. And then I'll also share a little bit about my mindset about when I went into the test. Because I feel like a lot of people, they struggle with like test taking anxiety or whatever. I don't know. Like that's not something that I've really experienced or really indulged in. I get a little nervous about it. But again, it's this approach of like, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the idea of a flow state, but there's a psychologist wrote a book called Flow, The Psychology of Optimal Experience. And he's broken down what's called a flow state. I think everybody has felt this at one point in their life or another. It's maybe when you're playing sports or when you're playing music or when you're designing. It's kind of when like time sort of disappears and you sort of just lose yourself in whatever it is you're doing. There's a couple of rules for like how to make something like that come about. Is generally that like you have to be facing something that is a challenge, but not too much of a challenge. Because like, for example, if you're playing tennis against somebody who's too difficult, you're not gonna achieve that flow state. If you're playing against somebody who's too easy and not as good as you, then you're also not going to get into that good zone. And furthermore, you kind of have to like, it becomes kind of quite meditative, where you step into this thing that you're doing and you kind of lose yourself in it. That's kind of a form of meditation. That's how I would approach the exams. I would put in the work ahead of time to make sure that I knew the content well enough. And then I'm stepping into the zone. I viewed it like I'm stepping into this arena where nothing else in the world matters right now. My cell phone is locked away in a locker. Like if anything went wrong, even like God forbid, like if somebody died, like my parents would like, my mom or my dad would be like, listen, whatever's happened has happened. And when this is over, like we'll talk to him then. And doesn't matter. Nothing else in the world matters. You step into this world where like you take off the watch, the cell phone, everything else is gone. It's just you and the computer, you and this test.
And your ID.
Yeah. Yeah. And like the 2 Kleenexes that they let you go and blow your nose in when it's allergy season. Like I almost found that relieving in a way to step into the exam where I could just like give 100% at this thing. And I knew that I was prepared and I was coming in to do my best. So, I mean, for me, it was a combination of preparation, meditation beforehand, and also meditation, like basically in the test, trying to get into that flow state. And that was a lot of like the way that I've approached testing for a long time.
Thank you.
How often do you test yourself? Like
You mean,
how
like-
often, yeah, like after you studied, how often would you want to do practice questions to test yourself?
I probably didn't take practice questions as often as I should have because I was worried about using them up. Because like you look at it once and then you know it again the next time you look at it. What I tried to do was I tried to take a practice test like a week or 2 ahead of time after studying it, and then use that to judge what I needed to focus on. Now sometimes that scared the shit out of me because I realized that I really didn't know anything. Once I got the Ballast book, I think Ballast has random practice questions kind of throughout. And so I would look at those and I would also revisit those because even though I told myself, oh, I've seen it once, I'm going to remember it, sometimes I didn't remember it. And like those were the ones that I especially needed to go over again and again. So when I came up on them through Ballast, the big Ballast manual, I would return to those a lot. And I would just kind of return to them as I needed to. I feel like I would study something and then like a day or 2 later, I would always be trying to recall it because it's not enough to kind of just trace over something once. You have to be able to pull it back out again. And I learned this when I was studying Spanish in high school. I sucked at Spanish at the beginning. And I would read over the vocabulary words. I'd see them both there on the page next to each other. I would read it. I'd be like, yeah, I know that one. The reason why I knew it was because the other word was right next to it. And I was unconsciously looking at the word next to it in my periphery. I was lying to myself saying that I knew it. And it's like, can you cover it up, walk away, and recall it again? Like I'll be driving to work thinking about, oh yeah, what were the different types of like masonry mortar? Or I'd be at lunch and I'd kind of like try to recall it in different situations. So I would say I tested myself in a way like that, kind of on my own, in addition to like going over the practice questions, which I probably should have done more of.
Yeah. We hammer on them in the boot camp. I say that
That's good.
people in the boot camp probably do 4 times more practice questions than people that don't take boot camp. Because I think at the end of the day, all this test is testing is your ability to recall the right answer at a moment's notice. And, you know, English is my first language, and that's a struggle sometimes. I read the question and say, what the hell are they asking for?
Yeah.
But, yeah.
And reading the questions is almost like a whole skill in and of itself. I think that kind of the skill of reading over the question, making sure you caught everything, reading through the choices, and making sure that you consider it all. I don't know. It felt similar to the way that I would have to read plans in the office. Like if I'm redlining something and making sure that everything makes sense, it's not necessarily linear. You're gonna have to like take it all in and look at it all, and then kind of fly through it one way and then double back and look at it another way, making sure that, like, let's say all the linked markers on the plans make sense. You kind of look at it that way. And then within reading the question, like you have to look at the actual question, and then also look at the answer choices and think, like, does something ping up in my mind? What was the first thing that came to mind? And I would always try to hold on to that and consider it, right? And without saying, oh yeah, that's definitely the right answer, because sometimes like they put the right answer at the bottom, so that way you think you got the right answer at A, but then it's really like D. And I don't know, to me it was like the whole process. You had to be kind of meditative about all that too.
Yeah.
Did you set like a deadline for yourself, or did you have a deadline for something in particular, or do you think that's a good thing or a bad thing?
Yeah, I had a deadline for myself that I was going to be up in New York to see the 4th of July fireworks a year ago. And I did not make that. I had that deadline in for a long time. And then I was trying to take one test a month a year ago. No, 2 years ago. And I was going to be done. I was going to do January, February, March, April, May, and I was going to be finished. And I got through the first 3, and I actually did that. And then I waited too long to transition, and then I kind of let some other things get in the way. I didn't get to them until later on. And then again, it was like New Year's came around last year. I kind of had a come to Jesus moment. I said, I'm going to get this done this year. I always had a deadline, but it kind of became a moving target. I finally got the last one, but yeah, I was usually looking at the time frame of like months, figuring out when I was going to do it, like this month, next month. And I assumed studying for a month. So it was kind of the unit that I would use about how I was going to gauge my deadlines.
Why New York? What was so special about New York that, I mean, I'm personally from New York, so I what's around you just blends in, but I've never heard someone talk about it with such joy. Like oh my God, I want to go to New York.
Everybody down south has asked me this question. And like, I don't know, when I was like 3 years old, I just decided, yeah, I'm gonna move to New York one day. That's it. Like, check what's for lunch. And then like growing up though, I was born in Charleston, South Carolina, and Charleston's an awesome city. Like, it's beautiful. I love it there. But my dad was in the Air Force. And so we moved when I was like 5, and we went to Warner Robins, Georgia, which is in the middle of nowhere. And we were on like, it wasn't even a Southern town. It was like an Air Force town, and like half Southern, half Air Force town. And it's a suburb in the middle of nowhere. Like most suburbs at least are like an appendage to a major metropolitan area. Warner Robins had all the money coming in through the Air Force base, and there was like no major city. There was nothing to do. It was so boring. And I kind of had this feeling like when like you're out of food and then you go to the refrigerator and you're like, I'm just being picky. And then you open the refrigerator and literally all there is like condiments and like baking soda. It was like that. Like, you're in Warner Robins thinking like, there's nothing to do. I must just be being too picky. But it's like, no, there really is nowhere to go. Like, we're just hanging out in the theater parking lot because we can't go anywhere. There's no place for us. And then I remembered like, oh yeah, my plan was always to move to New York. And so I'm going to move to New York. I mentioned it to a few people, and then they all blew back at me. They're all like, no, you don't want to go do that. You don't want to live in New York. They all say they want to live in some big city like New York or Atlanta, but they all come back. You'll see. And I was dumb enough to listen to them. I was like, well, I'll probably go to college in Atlanta, and I'll see Atlanta. And then if it's really not for me, I won't do it. But if it is for me, I'm going to move to New York. And then I got to Atlanta, and I loved it there. I was like, fuck those people telling me that I can't move and I don't want to move to New York. Like, I'll decide what I want to do and what I don't want to do. And so I kind of always had it in my head that I was going to get up here. And what I love about being up here is that like there's tons of stuff. And there's stuff going on all over the place, everywhere. I feel like Atlanta's so spread out. Like in most other cities, there's just not the amount of stuff going on. And what's funny is like growing up down south, everybody would say this to me, and they were all trying to change my mind. They were like, no, you don't want to go do that, because like if I go do that, like my thing is like, I'm not trying to change anybody's mind. I don't care if they want to come to New York or to stay there. They can totally be there. That doesn't offend me. But like they needed to change my mind. I wasn't allowed to want to go up to New York. But I feel that way though. I feel like, look, there's some people who want to live in smaller cities, suburbs, whatever. Like you should know what you want and go do that. You know what I mean? Like I wouldn't force anything on anybody, but I'd kind of accept whatever it is they feel like they want to go do.
I liked what you were saying earlier about meditating, and someone said recently on a podcast that I was listening to, shout out to podcast people, that if you want to create a habit, you know, stick it onto some habit that you already have, because it makes it that much easier to do it. So like if you want to meditate, you make coffee every morning, meditate in those 4 or 5 seconds that it's brewing. So like for the ARE, what would you recommend? Like I'm like, this is a new habit. This is not anything I'm adding on to. So I'm curious what you have to say about that.
Yeah, so for me, I guess I did that a little bit. It was like I'm eating breakfast anyway, and half the time I end up screwing around on my phone on YouTube regardless. Like why don't I just like watch videos about passing the ARE, or and then I guess it was also a matter of just hijacking my habits anyway. I would build, I guess I would kind of build into a habit. So all right, so I'm gonna come home, I'm gonna make dinner because I'm hungry. Then instead of pulling out the phone and getting on Instagram and wasting the rest of my evening, instead I'm gonna go sit down on the couch, set the timer for 20 minutes. I'm gonna meditate. And then after that, so let's say I tacked on meditation to dinner, and then I tacked on studying to meditation. So I stepped all those that way. And like making it mandatory that I was going to do it every day, I would say helped. But I did, in a sense, tack it on to a habit.
Cool. Any last questions before we wrap up?
Thank you. This was super helpful.
Awesome. I'm glad I could help.
I want to thank you both, Drew for being here and Michael for inviting him and for being out there for all of us. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks,
kind of how this whole thing happened was I was looking for, I was working on the pro practice syllabus, and I was looking for some good ARE videos, and I bumped into Drew's architect exam video on YouTube, and I said, Drew Paul Bell, and I ended up adding it into my syllabus, and I took a picture of it inside the syllabus, and I said, Drew, I just added you into my boot camp syllabus. And he said, that's cool, man. And we just started talking, and I said, you know what, let's do a thing with the boot camp. Let's get Drew Paul Bell talking to the boot camp. So yeah, thanks for doing this, Drew. I really appreciate it.
Thanks a lot for having me, man. I really appreciate it. You know, I was sitting down when you texted me, I was sitting down writing out some ideas for YouTube videos. I was like, it was Saturday afternoon or whatever. I thought, you know, I need to get back into this. And so I thought it was cool that like once I finally dug in and worked on some stuff on my end, something else came in from you kind of out of the blue. I thought that was awesome.
Yeah, totally. All right, folks. Thanks for hanging out. Thanks for chatting with us.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for having me too, man, by the way. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Anytime.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
So that's my talk with Michael Riscica. I hope that you liked it. Don't forget to check out in the description down below links for the conference in Portland, the Young Architect Conference, and I hope to see you there.